Hello again, Joe Yudin here from Touring Israel, Luxury Private Tours. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a very special tour guide who is in high demand and has an interesting background and a master's degree from the Hebrew University. He'll talk a little bit about that, as well as a BA in Middle Eastern Studies. Lives down in the Negev on Kibbutz Dorot. Lior Laufer, welcome.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Very well, very well. Good to see you.
You too. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, briefly, in 30 seconds? Where are you from? Where are your parents from? Why did you decide to settle down on a kibbutz in the Negev near the Gaza Strip? And then we can talk a little bit about that area.
So I grew up in the north in a town called Naharia, and I used to say I love traveling all over the country. And when people ask me, do I prefer the north, the green north, or the desert south, I always said it was kind of like asking if I like better mommy or daddy.
All right.
Eventually, I decided it's the south. You can choose whether it means mom or dad, but for me, it was the south. I've been living here for the past pretty much 15 years or so, and I love this area very much. It's about 4 miles east of Gaza Strip perimeter, which adds some interests to it, some challenges as well, of course. And living around here, loving the nature and the environment, and um, growing up, understanding politics and grown up stuff. I was very interested in how all this influences our lives. And so, they say that tour guides are a jack of all trades and a master of none. I
Right.
wanted to be a master in something, so I went and took my master's. The full name, and it took me a couple of months to figure out how to say it fluently, is Policy Management of Natural and Environmental Resources, specializing urban and regional planning. And so throughout this degree, and again, I'm towards the end of it, I haven't completed it yet, I've, I've realized the incredible impact that the politics and the geography or the geopolitics have on our lives, everybody's lives.
Mhm.
And living here in this area, it made me very interesting to learn the different interactions and relationships between the different actors in this arena and how eventually it comes down to my day-to-day life.
Right.
Uh,
So the Gaza Strip, it's a very interesting place. Um, Egypt had occupied it between 1948 and 1967. Between that time, between 48 and 67, the Egyptians organized a band of terrorists called the Fedayeen, who would shoot mortars and sniper attacks and terrorist activities as a base on the
infiltration.
Gaza Strip. And we captured that area in 67. And after the Egyptians and the Palestinians and the Jordanians and the Syrians rejected peace talks, we began to settle the northern Gaza Strip. Eventually, we withdrew from the Gaza Strip. When was that? In 2007, I
Five.
believe.
Yeah,
2005.
2005.
We withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip. And then Hamas was elected as the government over it's almost 2 million people in the Gaza Strip. No one's really sure how many people it is today, but about 2 million.
About
And
2 million.
it's been a very hostile entity, and there's already been a couple of wars in there between, but after we withdrew in 2005, and there's still a trickle today, which sometimes becomes a turning the faucet on of missiles into Israel. So your master's really deals with the geopolitics of the environmental impact of Israel and in the Gaza area, as I understand. So with that brief understanding, let's hear a little in depth. I guess water is a key issue for Gaza Strip. What do they have any natural water sources?
So, water and energy, I'll connect that.
Mm-hmm.
And the historical briefing that you just gave is pretty much right. I will add two more pins into that narrative that you've described, which will be that the one point in history that is the Oslo Accords,
Hmm.
93 and 95, the two stages, and the formation of the Palestinian Authority.
Hmm.
And the other pin is just to um, clarify that however you regard Gaza, whether it should be part of Israel or not, the official status of it until the disengagement in 2005 was occupied
Hmm.
because it was a military administration, an under Israeli military administration. Um,
Well,
so I guess
I think most of the international community would say that it was occupied, but Israel always considered it as administered, correct?
yeah, that's why I'm always very cautious with the terms, right? Whether it is the occupied territories or whole of Israel, right?
Right.
So West Bank or Judea and Samaria, all these terms eventually um, kind of give in your ideology, your agenda.
Right.
Um, so it was all you asked a good question. What is their water resources? What's their energy resources? And as a natural water resources, the only thing they have is really the aquifer,
Okay.
the groundwater, basically underneath them, underneath all the towns in that entire area, which is basically part of the coastal aquifer, which goes, if you imagine the map of Israel, then all along the coast there is an aquifer, groundwater, and it's being pumped and using water from the beginning of days, pretty much. From
Hmm.
once they learn how to dig wells, they do it and they dig down to the ground and they find water. The problem is that at a certain point, there was simply too many people. And that goes to the world in general and in Gaza Strip much more so. One of the most highly populated areas in the world. And so at a certain point, there is a pace in which these resources renews, right? Replenished. And once you take out more than comes in, then you're losing balance. And that's when things start to change in regard of the aquifer. And so the aquifer was slowly being salinated once you pump too much of it. And today, within Gaza Strip, 90% and even more of the water coming out of their pipes when they open the taps in their homes is inadequate for drinking, according to World Health Organization standards. Um,
And what you're saying is that's due to the overpumping. It's a shared aquifer with Israel. We pump from it, they pumped from it. They were only supposed to pump a certain amount every year, and they overpumped it, and now it's ruined. Basically, it's salty, it's saline, and it really can't be used anymore. Is that correct?
so it's pretty much close to there, if not already
Mhm.
there. And that was why I wanted to pinpoint the formation of the Palestinian Authority with the Oslo Accords in the mid 90s. And the idea was because you've mentioned Israel occupied or administrated, right, with different terms. The Gaza Strip, and again, we're not talking about the entire conflict here, we're just focusing on the water and energy to Gaza Strip. Uh, so Israel, as the occupier, as the
Mhm.
administrator, had to provide all the necessities.
Mhm.
They formed the Palestinian Authority that was supposed to become a new political entity, a new regime, and eventually a sovereignty, which is not really there yet. Um, so they took responsibility over the water supply and the electricity supply. Some of it, of course, came from Israel, but the Palestinian Authority, the PA, was responsible for the distribution of that to the population. Um, when Hamas took over in '06, and again they say it was a coup, but you mentioned that he was elected, and in a nutshell, the problem was that he was elected, but the problem was that nobody wanted him to get the reins, right? To
Mhm.
get in control. Neither Israel, the Americans, and even the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, the heads of the Palestinian Authority, and so they simply didn't pass on the administration. What
Right.
happened in Gaza Strip that Hamas had much more power than in the West Bank, he simply it was a coup, right? But no, but he did had a democratic legitimacy, ironically. But still, Hamas doesn't have all the capabilities and means to really control, to really apply his uh, uh, his sovereignty on the population, on the organizations. It's too big on him, right? And he failed to do that. And the main thing he did was trying to preserve and continue the struggle against Israel and not dealing with all the civilian issues, at least
Right.
not as well as he should have. So on top of overpumping, and that's also a resort and not a result and not only a cause, but the people simply have no water in Gaza Strip.
Mhm.
Even water that do comes out of their faucets nowadays happens few days a day, and in some places for few hours a day, and in some places few hours for 2 or 3 days that they have water coming out of their taps. Um, and then let's not go in at least yet to the accusations and reasons who's to blame for it. But nowadays, there's too little desalination, and there wasn't for many years. Today, they have 4 desalination plants.
In
Uh,
Gaza, there are 4 desalination
four
plants.
desalination plants. Some of
Okay.
it of brackish water in the south, and some of
Mhm.
it is seawater in the center. Here's an example for one of the desalination plants. This is the central Gaza desalination plant. That provides desalinated or affordable desalinated water for a couple of 100,000 people in the
Okay.
center of Gaza. Um, and there are a few more desalination plants. Some of them are even private ones that are selling privately, commercially to the people. And these prices are very high because they're not piped. They are transported on tracks, on tankers, and that's the most pretty much tanked water is pretty much the most expensive water you can buy.
Well, the Gazans get trillions of dollars of international aid. I think per capita they get more than any other entity in the world. I once read that they get per capita more international aid than the entire continent of Africa. So they
Really?
have desalination plants. Why doesn't Hamas, who's I know they were elected once, and their term has expired, and they haven't held new elections. They also did away with the opposition. But so why doesn't Hamas build pipes from their 4 desalination plants?
All right. So let's draw something in our minds to better
Okay.
understand it. We have an arena, right? And that's
Mhm.
our arena, this region, this area. And there's 3 major players, which are Hamas, PLO, right? The West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, various names, and Israel,
Mhm.
right? So these 3 actors are playing in this arena. And of course, there's impacts from the world. There's the West, let's say Europe and the US, and there's the Arab countries. Um, Now, so you said, all right, so the desalinations, there's a lot of donations, there's a lot of money coming in. How come Hamas doesn't do anything with it? Even to begin with, before Hamas took over, when it was still the Palestinian Authority, Israel, as part of the Oslo Accords, was committed to transfer 5 MCM, million cubic meters, whatever, forget about the units, measurements, but 5 MCMs a year to the Gaza Strip
Of water.
of water. And that's what was already going in.
Okay.
And then there was a commitment to deliver 5 more. Israel built the pipe all the way to the fence, and the PA failed to complete the pipe on their side. Right? So we want to give you water, but we're not going to just spill it over the ground. So the infrastructure was very bad even before Hamas. So that's one element. Um, the other one is that after Hamas did take over, Hamas is considered as a terror organization by most countries in the world. No country wanted to deal with Hamas directly.
Mm,
So they don't want to give money to Hamas. They want to give it to lower ranks, whether it's governmental or not, but lower ranks. And so it causes for lower scale projects.
I see.
Right? So that's one issue. Another issue is that because of there's so many rounds of violence between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, investors don't want to risk their investments.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would say, why should we build all these pipes on the streets if the next time there's a round of violence, whoever started it, there's going to be a bomb falling on it and it's going to be completely useless. So there's also the fear of the investors to give in money. And when they do give money, they will give money for short term projects. Again, for a better security of their investments.
And do
So
all of these monies for these short-term projects, do they get to where they're supposed to go?
it depends whom you're asking,
Mhm.
because stuff does happen. You can see a lot of pictures of the hospitals and isolation establishments or facilities that they're building now, mostly in the southern Gaza Strip. There is stuff going on, especially it really matters who really gets the money, whether it's the UN Works and Relief Agency, UNRWA, whether it's various organizations, Hamas is the government. But the facts on the ground show very high investment in development of tunnels, underground tunnels, whether it's for economic smuggling purposes and whether it's for attack purposes, offensive purposes. There's a lot of investment in the underground that does not provide any services for the people on the ground.
Right. And there's also a lot of investment for the Hamas officials and their families and their party members. Definitely a disproportionate amount uh, pertaining to what the average Gazan gets. Wouldn't you say? I mean,
Of course, maybe it's maybe not as extreme as it happens with the PLO people because they
mhm,
are accused in much worse corruption.
right.
But yes, if you're connected to Hamas, then your condition is probably better than people who are not part of it. Maybe it's worth mentioning that today the estimates of proper official Hamas activists is maybe 25, 30,000 people among the something like 2 million people total in the Gaza Strip.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of I was surprised to hear that because in our mind the perception is that everybody's Hamas in Gaza Strip. Even if they support Hamas, not all of them are really part of it.
Right. So let's shift gears a little bit. So you live on the outskirts of the Gaza Strip in the Negev Desert, in the Southlands, on a kibbutz. There's a lot of tension between Gaza and Israel, especially in that part of the country. We usually don't. We try not to take our tourists too close. I mean, when there's periods of calm, we'll do tours of places like Sderot, which is right on the border with Gaza and receives an awful lot of missiles when Hamas starts things up again. Usually, they start things up again when they need something. It's kind of a blackmail with
Yeah,
Israel. We need more money, or we need more food, or we need more water. So they launch a few missiles, and depending on the political climate in Israel, whether we're going to give it to them or not, or go on the
yeah.
offensive, which can have a snowball effect. Tell us about that.
So it's very interesting. All these, we call it rounds, right? Rounds of violence.
Right.
Um, it does happens mm, here and there.
Hmm.
We feel it and experience it here much more than the media shows. Um, you don't hear on a lot of the stuff we hear here. Um, Me and my wife have already learned to distinguish between the different sounds and explosions that's happening, whether it's a Iron Dome interception launch or the Qassam rockets launch or the interception in the air, or whether it is if the really big ones are bombing the tunnels. We see here example of a Qassam exhibition or rockets exhibition that is placed just by the police station in Sderot. And that's some of these pictures, some of these rockets are there for. It all started in 2002,
Right.
2003. That's where the first rockets came in. Some of them still have the names of the person who found them from the police. Here you can
What
see one,
what
the
I find
place where they
interesting about
find.
these rockets is they're homemade rockets. Okay, the Hamas builds these a lot of times out of water pipes, and we're talking about water and hooking up, all the houses and apartments of Gaza to the water system. And Israel doesn't want to give Gaza materials to build water pipes because instead of making water pipes, they're making missiles to shoot at you and your family. I mean, isn't that part of the problem?
It's pretty crazy. They call it the dual use products, right? The stuff
Right.
you can use for both
For
military and
men.
civil use.
Right.
Um, yes, it's a problem. They started recently with all the kites, right, and the incendiary balloons. So I've read one of COGAT's, the Administration on and Coordination of the Operations of the Governments in the Territories, the Israeli institution that determines what can you bring into Gaza and what you cannot.
Okay.
And one of the recent things that went onto that list is marbles, like glass marbles
Hmm.
and kites as kits, right? You cannot import kite kits into Gaza nowadays, and marbles, small glass or metal playing marbles. And because they eventually used kites and marbles to send it with the wind and it would land. Some of it landed right here in my kibbutz, not so far from where I live. My girls know to stay away if they see balloons on the ground. They know they have to stay out of it, away from it. So it's pretty crazy. If we want to tie this to what happened to these days, so people are at home with their families and there's nothing much to do. And so two girls from the kibbutz took the opportunity for a very interesting project. A couple of months ago, they put new shelters around the kibbutz, and it was very good. Bomb shelters, of course. We have 15 seconds here, warning time, from when we hear the siren to the time where we need to be protected. So around the kibbutz, there were very few shelters, and now they put a couple more. And then yesterday, two girls invited families. You would register, and you would go to a specific hour, so you're not meeting other families.
Right.
And it's within 100 meters perimeter from your home, so we're not breaking the regulations.
Well, the Corona
Uh,
regulations we're in right
yeah,
now. Right.
yeah. So yeah, so here you see me and my family. We just finished painting the bomb shelter. The white lines are not that ugly. It's tape that they're going to remove, and then it will be a nice straight line. Um, and that's how we both made the kibbutz look nice, painted the shelters, uh, spent some time, together outdoors in the air, open air. And eventually, we talked about how the Israel kind of limits or restricts the resources into Gaza Strip, and they have no resources, and they want to fight against Israel, and they shoot bombs, and we try to defend ourselves, and eventually spend some nice time during Corona days. Here's the picture.
So what's the solution? I mean, we in the after 1948, the Egyptians took control of Gaza. They didn't create a Palestinian state out of it. And after 1967, we wanted to give it to the Palestinians so they would have their own state. They wouldn't talk to us. And 1978 to 1980, during the Camp David Accords, we wanted to give Gaza back to the Egyptians, but the Egyptians didn't want it, and it was decided in the Camp David Accords that the Palestinians would eventually have some sort of autonomy. Then we have the Oslo Accords, which was in 1993-95, which was supposed to give the autonomy, which Gaza and Jericho were the first two regions to get autonomy under the Palestinian Authority, the PLO. And then they were supposed to prove that they could one of the stipulations in the Oslo Accords is that the PLO will disarm Hamas. Stated. Okay, they didn't do it. And other terrorist organizations. And then this was supposed to, once they did these principles, promote peaceful coexistence, disarm Hamas and all the terrorists, and recognize Israel's right to exist, we were supposed to start talking about a final status solution, a state for the Palestinians. That never happened. So where is this going? What do you see? Your neighbors with the Gazan Palestinians. What do you see in the future? Where are we going to be 10 years from now?
I wish I knew. I think you described, how they often say about the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Right.
And I believe that's true, but I also think we also made a lot of mistakes along the process.
Absolutely.
I think it's kind of takes two to tango. I still think we're more right than them. But it definitely takes two to tango, and we made our mistakes too. I don't know if the helicopter
It's okay.
disturbs the audio, but we have a lot of that here. In any case, I mentioned the explosions. We also hear a lot of aircrafts and helicopters. Um, but I think the answer is rooted in education. That's my belief, and I think the most important thing is for both Israelis and Palestinians is to educate the next generation for peace. Sadly, you've mentioned I've studied Middle Eastern studies. I mean, I'm not sad about that, but studying it, sadly, I've learned, I wrote a paper about the Palestinian education curriculum, and it seems like there's much less incitement in their textbooks than used to be. But on the other hand, there's a lot of eh, there's no easy way to call it, some lies, historical lies, but there are also a lot of the education promotes a point of view that will not allow compromise. For example, there is in a geography book, there is a question: how many bodies of water are there in Palestine? And guess how many they count? All four, right? The Sea of Galilee, the Red, the Dead, and the Med.
Right.
And it's a lie, you know. Um, you remember the half a shekel taxes to Jerusalem?
Sure.
In the history textbooks, it's half an Arab shekel. There was never such a thing.
Right.
That's how they call it, an Arab shekel. So, what I want to say is that I think the solution is rooted in education. I know how I educate my girls, and when we talk with them, they're first grades, twins are in first grade. They ask, they're curious, what is this Gaza? They're shooting at us or not? I tell them it's not Gaza shooting at us. It's not all the people. It's few bad people that are shooting at us. So I'm afraid that the Palestinians do not educate their children for loving peace, for compromise, for preferring their children's lives over our death.
Right. Unfortunately, Hamas, which is a offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, is a very strict Islamic jihad organization that wants to spread the revolution, not just in Israel, but in Spain and in Italy and in Yugoslavia and eventually the entire West.
Yep.
And I don't see how, with them sitting in power there, dishing out the aid to whomever they want and keeping the people down and keeping this lack of education in the schools, I don't see how we can have peace as long as they're in charge. I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, that was the whole basis of the Oslo Accords, is that the PLO would disarm Hamas. They would use the school system and the airwaves to promote peaceful coexistence, and that they would recognize Israel as a Jewish state. And those three principles were never really implemented, not even by the PLO. So I don't, as long as Gaza is ruled by these extremists, I don't see where it's going to end. I mean, is there going to be another war? Are we going to have to replace their government, or are we just waiting for the Gazans to wake up and rebel against Hamas? Can they rebel against Hamas without any weapons? I mean, where do you
So
see it going?
Hamas is really between the rock and the hard place because it wants to allow some protests, demonstration against them to allow the population to ventilate, right? And
Right.
they know they're not doing a good job. They know the people have no reason to be happy about their lives in Gaza Strip. So on one hand, they do want to let them ventilate. On the other hand, they don't want them to get out of their control.
Mm-hmm.
But I have no pity for Hamas. I have a lot of pity for the other people in Gaza Strip.
Absolutely.
I think, as far as I know, to be a Gazan nowadays is pretty much the worst situation in the world. There's not a single actor in this game that really wants and works towards making their lives better. Um, Hamas uses his weakness as his strength, right? This is a humanitarian crisis. Help us, right? So he wants to keep them down. He wants to keep this crisis. The PLO, Palestinian Authority, they also want to keep them under, keep the crisis because they hope that maybe if the crisis goes on, then the population in Gaza Strip will kick Hamas out, right? And take the administration away, and then the PA maybe can go in and take control. Israel maybe wants to ease the life and better the lives of Gazans, but cannot do anything, right? Because if
Right.
Israel helps anyone in the Palestinian side, they will be collaborators and everybody else will go against them.
Right.
Uh, the EU wants to help, but doesn't really know what's going on, and they're doing all the wrong stuff. The Americans, Trump has pulled out his influence from pretty much any other area of influence that he had. So nobody really wants and works to better the lives of Gazans. And that's, I think, is horrible. And I
Mm-hmm.
think only this will be the first thing that have to change. Somebody have to really worry for and take care for the Gazans in order for them to even have hope. Look at the Maslow pyramids, right, and so on.
Right.
People must feel safe in order to try and realize themselves. Um, so I think the solution is, of course, you need to remove Hamas. You need to educate the next generation. That's how I see the
Okay.
answer.
Well, very interesting stuff. We could talk about this forever. Lior Laufer, thank you so much. I
Thank you,
can't wait
Joe.
till tourism gets back, so you can get out there with our groups and start showing more parts of the country. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. Shout out to Jonathan Rose, our engineer and tech guru. Also, Wendy Perrin, trusted travel expert for 2020. There he is. Thank you, Jono. And we will see you again soon. Thank you, Lior.
Thank you. Bye bye.